Hi, my name is Stephen Barr. I'm Chief Evangelist for DevGraph, and today I want to tell you about how to debug applications with Devspaces. So in order to do that, it's important to remember how Devspaces works. So in your typical all-local development setup, your editor, which is VS Code, or any other editor you want to use, and all your tools, they run locally, hence it's all local. Now your editor has a few different types of tools which can assist you in debugging. So at the first level, there's editor built-ins, and these are the standard out-of-the-box tools provided by the editor, and this means syntax highlighting and some basic code inspection. And then after that, there's editor plugins. Now these are tools that can help you understand your code and hopefully help you stop bugs from showing up in the first place. And these plugins are language specific, and they can enable things like code refactoring, renaming symbols, IntelliSense, which is code completion, that sort of thing. Now these plugins add extra features like the ability to set breakpoints and inspect the values of variables at runtime. This is often done through the language server protocol, which is interesting to read about. And finally, there are external tools, and these are other executables that can analyze the code, and they usually are run through the terminal, but sometimes these external tools can be paired with a plugin to give a nice integrated experience. Alright, so with that setup, let's talk about debugging in Devspaces. Now, for the most part, it's very similar to your local debugging setup, with the exception that local in this case is the ephemeral Linux machine which is hosting your DevSpace. Now what this really means in practice is that Devspaces needs to know how to set up your debugging tools, because whenever you launch an instance, it's ephemeral. We have to make sure that those tools are set up ready to go. Now let's go through using an editor plugin and setting up an external tool. And let's start with a Python example. So if you want to follow along, check out this repository. There's a link in the description. Now, if you're starting a new project in Python, it's going to prompt you to install the MS Python plugin. Now, in order to make sure that every time you launch this particular project, it also includes this plugin, you can add the following to your .gitpod.yaml. And you can see if you click through the menus here, it will do it for you. Now, doing this should add these lines to your gitpod.yaml file. There's a VS Code directive and the ms-python.python extension. So with this plugin enabled, we get the ability to do more structured semantic changes to our code, like rename a symbol. Now this takes place at a semantic level rather than a textual level. So to show you a little demo, you see how I have this X symbol in the outermost scope, and I could rename it to ZZZ. Now it didn't change the usage of X inside the myFN function body. That's because the editor understands the scoping rules of Python. So now that we've talked about editing your program, we want to talk about running it. Now we can just fire up the terminal and do python scriptalpha.py and then rely on good old print debugging, and that can be good enough, but we can do better. So in order to have VS Code control the running of our code, we need to set up a launch.json. So in order to do that, we can click on the Run and Debug menu, and it will prompt us to set up a default launch.json. Now this file will look like this. And all it's doing is saying when you want to launch Python, it will run the currently selected .py file. It will run it in its default debugging setup. So we can then run Python code using the play button or the F5 key, and that will allow us to set breakpoints, inspect variables, and anything else that we would want to do. Now this is really easy, and we can see the different options like attaching to running processes. There's great documentation available at this link. And you can see all of the different development activities, debugging activities, stepping through variables, inspecting things. Now that's great. Alright, now let's look at a third-party tool. Now say we've seen the light and we want to use static types, and we're working on updating our Python code to have type annotations. So we can use MyPy to perform static analysis on our Python code and look for those type-related annotations. So first we want to make sure that our Linux environment, our development container that's running Devspaces, has access to MyPy. Now this is a matter of modifying the gitpod.yaml file to making sure it gets installed. And this is the command to install it. And note that our Dev Factory workspace full image already has MyPy built in, so you don't need to do this. But if you were using a different image that didn't have it, this is what you would do. So now we can use MyPy as we would at the terminal. And there's good news for MyPy, there's a MyPy extension, and this will integrate the third-party tool into the Devspaces IDE. So to do that, we can search for the MyPy extension in the marketplace and then add it to gitpod.yaml. Your gitpod.yaml file should now look like this. So we see we have two extensions, the mspython.python extension and the madangover.mypy extension. Now you might need to close and reopen your source file in order to get MyPy to work, but now that we have it installed and the extension's running, we see that we have great editor integration. So we see that scriptalpha.py is red, indicating there's a type error, and I've contrived this to make this error. You see that I've made a function called addNumbers, which takes a list of integers. And then I try calling it there on line 20 with a list of strings. And so we get a red underline right under the L character, right where the error is. And if we hover over the error, we get a MyPy pop-up, which explains the error, that I'm trying to that have an incompatible type error. I'm passing in list of string, but list of ints are expected. So in this case, it's telling us the error that's that function. And this is great. This is what any sane language should do. So to summarize, in this particular example, it's for Python, but there's a general pattern. And the pattern is find and install a language-specific extension. Now, if you're a VS Code user already, you probably have your favorite language-specific extension. And have a look at this list if you're not, and it'll give you some ideas of the different extensions that are available for the different languages. Once you've got that, then you want to set up a launch.json file so you can use the integrated running and debugging features like setting breakpoints and stepping through. And there's a really good example here on code.visualstudio.com about a very thorough launch.json file for a C++ project. And finally, you want to identify any external tools that you might use. So in Python, this could be MyPy. Now in C, you might want to add valgrind if you're looking for memory leaks. You might want to count lines using slot count. In any case, once you've identified those tools, you want to make sure they're identified in your dev space. Now you can do this either at launch time in the gitpod.yaml file, or at the container build time using a gitpod.docker file, and we'll cover how to do that in a separate video. But for many of these external tools, there's VS Code plugins which provide nice editor integration. Alright, I hope this explains how you can use dev spaces effectively to debug your code. If you're already a user of VS Code, the process is basically exactly the same. You find the extensions you want, and you just need to make sure that any external dependencies you want, like MyPy or valgrind, that they're installed before your dev space launches. And we can do this either using the gitpod.yaml file or modifying the .gitpod.docker file. And there'll be a separate video about that. Alright, happy hacking, have a lovely day, and please reach out to me if you have any questions. I always love helping out. You can see me at Twitter on @SteveJB, at LinkedIn, and just reach out and say you have a dev spaces issue, and I'm happy to jump on a Zoom or whatever you need. Alright, till next time, talk to you later.